They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And when I look at this picture of Jaden Smith wearing a skirt, leggings, nail polish, and a flower in his hair, it tells the story of a boy who never learned what it meant to be a man. What's even sadder about this picture is that Jaden Smith had a father in his life. And you would think his father, Will Smith, would have taught him what it means to be a man and the intangibles of manhood and why they are never meant to be sacrificed. When I look at Jaden Smith in this picture, it tells me a story of a boy who does not understand what is important about those intangibles of manhood and why they should never be sacrificed. Now, Jaden Smith says that he allowed himself to be the new spokesmodel for the Louis Vuitton women's line because for $10 million you'd be gay too. Well, I have this to say to Jaden Smith. For all the money in the world, Shawn James would never sacrifice his intangibles of manhood because Shawn understands the value of those intangibles and they have no price because when a man loses his intangibles of manhood, he is pretty much not worth anything. Because when a man allows himself to sacrifice his intangibles of manhood for things like fame or money, he is telling the world that there's a price on him and that he can be bought and that he basically, is worth less than anything out here. And that's what Jaden Smith is sending a message to the world about. He is telling the world that he is only worth $10 million and that anybody out here can degrade him for the low price of $10 million. Now, what are the intangibles of manhood? The intangibles of manhood pertain to a man's values and a man's character. These intangibles are never to be sold or compromised in any way, shape, or form. What are these intangibles? These intangibles are a man's dignity, which means what a man values about who he is on the inside. A man's self respect, which means how he presents himself to the world and says that if he respects himself, others will respect him because he's presenting an image of self that he values and regards. His self worth, which means he values himself as a man and will not allow others to degrade him. And his love of self, which means he loves himself enough to do what is best for him and to present a positive image of self. And then there's his self-esteem, which means his his image of self and his regard of self. And these are the things that Jaden Smith sacrificed for that $10 million to become the spokesmodel for the Louis Vuitton women's line. Because by allowing himself to be a spokesmodel for a women's line and allowing people at Louis Vuitton to dress him up in dresses, he is telling the world that, again, people do not have to respect him, they do not have to regard him, and they do not have to see him as a man. Because if they can dress him up as a woman, they are basically saying that he has no value as a man. And what's even sadder about this picture is that his two parents, Will and Jada Pinkett Smith, are allowing their child to degrade himself and reflect not only negatively on himself, but on their family. Because when you allow a boy to be effeminized like this, it sends a message to the world that not only is the boy weak, but the parents are weak as well. And that in that weakness that they can be cowed or broken down and made to submit. Because when males are dressed up in female clothes, the message that is sent by that is saying that this boy can be broken down. This boy can be made to submit. This boy is a weak boy. This boy has no sense of manhood, no sense of masculinity, no sense of values or character. He can be pretty much bought and paid for at any price and made to do anything for any price. And this is what happens when a man does not understand his intangibles of manhood. When a man understands his intangibles of manhood, he does not make compromises like this. He does not allow people to degrade him like this. He does not allow people to put him in weak positions like this because he understands that once you lose those intangibles of manhood, once people can do whatever they want to you, you are no longer a man to people. You are no longer anybody that they're going to respect. You are in a less than position. And when you're in a less than position, you've pretty much lost before you even started. And when you lose like that, when you lose face, when a man loses face, there's no coming back from that. And what Jaden Smith has done at this young age is that he has lost face. His image of self that he's presenting to the world is now going to be degraded. And when you look at this boy, he pretty much does not understand what he has lost. And he does not understand that you can have all the money in the world, but if you don't have any self respect or dignity about yourself, or you don't carry yourself as a man of character and a man of honor, no one is going to regard you. Basically, Jaden Smith has cut himself off at the knees before he's even turned 21. So he has told the world, you don't need to see me as a man. You basically don't have to see me as anyone that I need to take seriously or anyone else out here needs to take seriously. He has placed himself in the position of a court jester, and you cannot buy yourself out of that position. You can't buy yourself out of a place where people are looking at you and see you as no one they need to respect. Respect is something that once you've lost it, it's pretty much gone. And when you lose your intangibles, when you say that, oh, I'll sacrifice my intangibles, again, you're saying that you can be bought at any price, and you basically can be made into a joke. And what this boy has done is he's made himself into the kind of joke that that people laugh at. Now, in comedy, there are two types of comedy. People they laugh with a joke or they can laugh at a joke. And when people are laughing with a joke, they are laughing at the punchline or the things that the person said. But when people are laughing at a person, they are laughing at the idea of degrading a person. And when people, like your Louis Vuitton executives, look at your Jaden Smith, they are laughing at him. And the sad part is that he can't hear the laughter. Because if he could hear the laughter the same way Dave Chappelle heard the laughter, I guarantee you he would look at himself and say, look at what I've done, look at what I've sacrificed. Because he sacrificed so much for this so-called fame that it wasn't funny. I mean, he sacrificed all the things that most men, would see as tremendously valuable. And the sad part is that his father never taught him that there are certain things you just don't sacrifice for anything, for fame, for riches. These are things you just don't sacrifice. I mean, no amount of money can make me ever want to put on a dress. No amount of fame could ever make me want to put on a dress because I understand that my image as a man has more value than any amount of money or any amount of fame. And that if I want fame or things like that, I can get that by hard work. I don't need to degrade myself for that because in order for something to have a value, it has to have a value to me. And if I see it as valuable, then it's worth something. And what this boy is doing is saying that, again, this fame and this popularity and that $10 million is worth more than him. And it says that he has no self worth, no self esteem, no dignity, and no positive image of self. And I don't care what anybody says, oh, he's just expressing himself, he's going to have money. That's not about any of that. I mean, when a man loses his intangibles, he is lost. He is pretty much done. I mean, we're going to look at this boy from here on in, and they're not going to see a boy. They're going to see a court jester. They're not going to see a boy who became a man. They're going to see somebody, again, who they can break down, make to submit, and, throw some crumbs at and put in this beta position. They're looking at this boy and seeing, again, a joke. They're not seeing somebody who they're going to look at and say and call sir and look at him from a position of respect. They're not going to look at him in any way, shape, or form like that. And you can't buy your way out of lost face. When a man again loses face, he has pretty much lost everything. When people lose face and they look at a guy who has lost face, they look at him completely differently than a guy who pretty much, they respect. When they look at a man who they respect, they walk right up to him, they call him sir, or they exchange things in a formal, respectable way. But when they look at a guy who they don't respect, they look past him, or they look away from him. They don't see him in the same way. And this is the way that people are going to look at your Jaden Smith. They're not going to see him as anyone that they're going to respect. And even if he had millions of dollars, they're not going to look at him as anyone they need to appreciate or regard. They're just going to see him basically as a joke. And when I look at, this image of Jaden Smith, it is part of a trend of the last 20 years of degrading the image of the African American man. Over the last 20 some odd years, I've seen more and more and more of these effeminized images of African American men permeating through the media. And what's really sad about this is that there has been no protest about it at all. In fact, we got some black people saying, oh, this is just part of comedy, this is part of humor. And again, I write comedy, I write humor, and I do not see any need for putting a black man in a dress. I don't see the need for so many images of black men in dresses. Um, the only reason I would say that they're putting all these images of black men in dresses is to degrade black men. Because if this was about a comedy trend, we would see equal amounts or even more amounts of white men in images like this. We would see, your A-list stars like your Christian Bale or any other of these white actors out here in dresses. We would see Hispanic actors dressed like this. We would see Indian actors dressed like this. But we don't see white, Indian, Arab, Hispanic men allowing themselves to be dressed like this because they understand what it means to be a man. They understand the intangibles of manhood. The only person who does not understand this are African American men because African American men are willing to sacrifice their dignity, their self respect, their self worth, all for 15 seconds of fame. They're willing to throw all of that away because they seek the approval of others, not understanding that when you seek the approval of others, you're giving away your personal power. And that's what Jaden Smith did when he became the spokesmodel for the new Louis Vuitton on women's line. He sacrificed his personal power. He gave away, again, another important component to manhood, which is personal power and those intangibles of manhood. And when you give away those values, those core values, you are saying, again, you have no value as a man. You do not see worth in being a black man. You do not take pride in being a black man. And that you are willing to sell out your black manhood and black masculinity for for a price. And that's what he did. And that's what a lot of black men have been doing over the last 20 years. I look at these images and they keep coming out year after year after year. And sadly, there is no pushback from your black community. Instead of Jada and Will Smith being outraged over not getting nominated for an Oscar or the lack of so called diversity at the Oscars, you would think they would be leading the charge against Louis Vuitton and organizing a boycott of of this company. And you would think they would be out here as parents and saying, look, I'm not allowing my child to go out here like this, and that this reflects badly on us. It says that we are bad parents, we have failed as parents, and if we allow our son to go out here, this is going to reflect negatively on us. You would think, again, this would be their course of action, but no, she's going to complain about, there being a lack of diversity at the Oscars. I could care less about the Oscars. It's a popularity contest. This is more important to me because these pictures out here, kids are growing up with these images, and then even worse, they're growing up with these ideas that are being promoted by these images. Because I find it interesting that you have all these white liberals and all of these non-blacks who will say, this image is perfectly fine. That you know, they're blurring the lines of gender. But why is it that you want to blur the lines of gender with black boys? Why is that? Because I heard Tia Mowry a while back say on a Mirror of the Fiera show that, regarding her son, that there is no such thing as gender. And I find it interesting that, everybody wants to talk about there's no such thing as gender with black boys. But if I was to take a white boy or a Hispanic boy or an Asian boy or an Arab boy, there would be a different story because why? Their fathers would be right there to say, no, that's not going to happen with my son. No, you're not going to dress my son up in a dress. No, you're not going to braid up my son's hair. No, you're not going to do that. Those fathers are going to step in the picture and say this is unacceptable. And they're going to check their females and let them know there are certain things about this boy you're not going to degrade because they understand the value of manhood. They understand the value of masculinity. They understand why it's important for a boy to have a strong male identity. And they understand that there are intangibles related to manhood that are never meant to be sacrificed. But in the black community, black men don't understand this. And I personally believe it's because a lot of these black men come from dysfunctional homes. They have learned dysfunctional values. And what's even worse, we have Madison Avenue advertisers and Hollywood movie studios continuing to promote these dysfunctional ideas and dysfunctional ideologies regarding black manhood with no pushback. I mean, what's sad about this, really, really, really sad about this, is that we haven't heard a single thing from your Al Sharpton on this, because Al Sharpton has sat there and spoke on the Oscars, but he hasn't spoken about this. Your Louis Farrakhan has not spoken about this. Your NAACP hasn't spoken about this. And many of your pro-blacks who say that they love black people have not said a word about this. You would think all these people would be coming together and saying, let's get together and boycott this Louis Vuitton. Let's get together and finally start standing up and giving some pushback against this degradation of the African American male image. Let's get together and stand up and say, we as black men are not going to allow ourselves to be cowed and placed in a submissive position under women. We're not going to allow ourselves to be humiliated like this, and we're not going to allow ourselves to be degraded like this. I remember back during the Iraq War when they took Iraqi prisoners and put women's panties on them. That was considered a war crime, and there was a lot of controversy about that. You can say that degrading an Iraqi man, Americans degrading an Iraqi man is a war crime, and this degradation of black men is perfectly fine. I mean, when you look at that, you can see the racism in that. These Iraqi men have enough backbone and testicles to say to themselves, even though we are prisoners of war, we still have dignity. But the sad part is, your African American man won't say that he has any dignity. Um, that's just really sad and disturbing to me that black men don't have the courage to come out and stand up like those Iraqi men did during the Iraq War. Those men stood up and said, even though we are prisoners of war, we are still men, and we still deserve to be treated with the same dignity and self respect that anybody else does. But your African American man, he's not saying that at all. Instead, he's sitting